The first warning sign should have been how calm he looked. Not angry, not distant, not cold, just calm. The kind of calm that feels practiced. But at the time, I mistook it for maturity. That was my first mistake. Our 10th anniversary party was Ethan's idea. That alone should have surprised me. He hated parties, hated attention, hated hosting people. But 2 weeks after I thought I'd successfully covered up a near disaster with my affair, he suddenly wanted to throw a huge anniversary celebration at a rooftop venue downtown. Family, friends, coworkers, even some of his clients. At the time, I thought maybe he was trying to reconnect with me. Now I understand he was building a stage. The affair with Marcus had lasted almost a year. 11 months and 6 days. Long enough to become routine. Long enough to stop feeling dangerous. That's the real danger with affairs. Not passion. Comfort. Once sneaking around starts feeling normal, you stop noticing how reckless you've become. Marcus worked in commercial real estate. Confident, charming, an expensive watch, expensive smile. The kind of man who made every conversation feel like flirting even when it wasn't. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that. By the time the anniversary party arrived, I genuinely believed I had everything under control. That's important. Because what happened only works if the person being exposed thinks they're safe. And I felt completely safe. The venue overlooked the city skyline. Warm lights, live jazz trio, open bar. Everything elegant in that understated wealthy way Ethan liked. I remember walking in and feeling impressed. Almost emotional. Because for a moment I thought maybe we were fixing things. It's embarrassing admitting that now. Especially knowing what he was really planning. Marcus arrived 40 minutes late. That had been carefully arranged. He came as the guest of one of my coworkers so it wouldn't look suspicious. And when I saw him enter the rooftop, my stomach flipped the same way it always did. Excitement mixed with fear. Addiction disguised as romance. Ethan shook his hand, smiled, welcomed him. And if Ethan felt anything in that moment, he hit it perfectly. That's what terrifies me looking back. Not the anger, the control. The night moved smoothly after that. Dinner, drinks, stories, people laughing, taking photos, posting anniversary pictures online. The perfect couple. That's the part that feels almost funny now. How many people toasted us while our marriage was already dead? At one point, Marcus brushed against my arm near the bar. Tiny contact. Quick, but dangerous. And Ethan saw it. I know he did because our eyes met immediately afterward. But he just smiled at me. Small, polite, controlled. I thought I had won that moment. That's the horrifying part. I thought his calmness meant ignorance. About 2 hours into the party, Ethan stood up and tapped his glass with a fork. The room quieted almost instantly. Everyone expected a sweet anniversary speech. And honestly, it started that way. He talked about our first apartment, how broke we were, how we used to eat takeout on moving boxes because we couldn't afford furniture. People laughed. My mother teared up. Even I started feeling emotional, because every word was true. That's what made the next part so brutal. Marriage, Ethan said, holding his wine glass. Depends on trust. Still normal. Still safe. Or so I thought. Not perfection, not passion, trust. He looked directly at me when he said that. And something in my chest tightened. Just slightly. Like instinct finally waking up. Then he smiled again. Calm. Always calm. And over 10 years together, he continued, you learn interesting things about trust. The room stayed quiet, listening, waiting. You learn how easy it is to mistake comfort for loyalty. That sentence changed the temperature of the entire rooftop. People didn't understand why yet, but they felt it. You could actually feel the energy shift. I remember setting my wine glass down because suddenly my hand didn't feel steady anymore. Ethan kept talking. Slowly, carefully. like every word had been rehearsed. You also learn that lies don't usually fall apart all at once. He glanced around the room, relaxed, almost conversational. They fall apart in patterns. And that was the moment I knew. Not fully, not consciously, but somewhere deep inside me, panic finally arrived. Marcus stopped moving beside the bar. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. That stillness people get when they realize danger has finally reached them. Ethan took a sip of wine, then continued. For example, he said, did you know restaurants automatically save reservation histories under loyalty accounts? A nervous laugh came from somewhere in the crowd, someone thinking this was a weird joke. Hotels do too. Silence. Complete silence. And once you notice repeated reservations for 2 people under fake business meetings? He shrugged lightly. Patterns become hard to ignore. My stomach dropped so hard it physically hurt. People started looking at me. Not fully yet, but enough. The uncertainty had entered the room, and uncertainty spreads fast. I whispered Ethan's name, trying to stop this quietly, trying to salvage something. But he kept going. I spent 3 months hoping I was wrong. That line hit harder than anything else, because suddenly this wasn't anger. It was grief. Organized grief. I kept waiting for a reason that made more sense than the obvious one. He looked at me again. Not rage, not hatred, just disappointment so deep it made me feel small. Then he raised his glass slightly toward Marcus, and everything detonated. But eventually, Ethan said calmly, I had to accept that my wife and Marcus weren't attending nearly this many work dinners for networking. Someone gasped. Actually gasped. Loud enough that everyone heard it. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear, which almost made me hate him in that moment. Because suddenly I was standing there alone. I started crying immediately. Not graceful tears, panic tears, humiliation tears. The kind where your body reacts before your mind catches up. Ethan, please. But he lifted his hand gently. Not aggressive, just stopping me. No, he said quietly. You've had almost a year to speak privately. That sentence carved straight through me, because everyone understood now. Friends, family, coworkers, my parents, his clients, all of them. And Ethan still wasn't finished. He lifted his glass again, then said the line I will probably remember for the rest of my life. So I'd like to make a toast. The room was frozen. Nobody moving, nobody speaking. To the man who's been dating my wife behind my back for 11 months? He looked directly at Marcus. Thank you for finally teaching me who I'm married to. Dead silence. Absolute silence. Marcus grabbed his jacket almost immediately. Coward. Couldn't even stay standing beside me. And watching him leave broke something in me that the exposure itself hadn't. Because for almost a year, I'd built this fantasy around us. Passion, connection, escape. But the second consequences arrived, he abandoned me in front of everyone. Ethan noticed too. Of course he did. He notices everything. You should probably go with him, he said quietly. Not cruel, not loud, which somehow made it worse. I asked if we could talk privately, begged honestly. But Ethan shook his head. We could have, he said. Before. That word destroyed me. Before. Before the lies. Before the hotel rooms. Before the rehearsed excuses. Before I turned our marriage into something transactional and secretive. People avoided eye contact as I grabbed my purse. No one knew what to do. No social rule exists for a marriage collapsing in real time over dessert and champagne. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Ethan behind me one last time. Oh, he said calmly. I turned around. The divorce papers are already signed. And then he took another sip of wine while the rooftop remained completely silent. The divorce moved fast after that. Too fast. Because Ethan had already prepared everything before the party. Lawyer, accounts, evidence, apartment. He wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. He had already processed the loss. The party wasn't revenge. It was closure. Months later, I asked him why he did it publicly. Why humiliate me instead of ending it privately? And his answer still stays with me. Because you turned our marriage into a performance, he said. I figured the ending deserved an audience too. That sentence follows me everywhere now, because deep down, I know he was right. The worst part isn't that people saw me get exposed. It's that for one horrible moment standing there while everyone stared at me, I realized my husband had probably stopped loving me long before the toast, and I'd been too distracted by excitement to notice the silence growing between us. By the time he raised that glass, the marriage was already over. I just happened to hear the official announcement with everyone else. People assume that when an affair is discovered, it ends in a massive, screaming explosion. They picture shattered glass, thrown dishes, tears, and desperate begging. I certainly thought so. I thought if my husband, David, ever found out about my affair with a man named Greg, there would be a huge, chaotic fight. I thought I would have the chance to cry, to make excuses, to manage his anger and slowly talk my way out of it. I thought I would have some control over the narrative. I never expected him to bypass my feelings entirely and weaponize my own affair against me. For 6 months, I lived what I thought was a flawless double life. I genuinely believed I was a mastermind. David was a quiet, analytical accountant. He was reliable, deeply loyal, but in my arrogant mind, he was incredibly boring. He spoke in spreadsheets and routines. Greg was the exact opposite. He was spontaneous, exciting, and constantly told me that I was the absolute love of his life. Greg used to whisper in my ear that he wished I would just leave David so we could be together forever. He painted pictures of a romantic, passionate life we could share if I was only brave enough to choose him. And foolishly, selfishly, I believed every single word. It all came crashing down on a Friday evening in early October. I walked through the front door at 5:30 p.m., feeling completely invincible. My plan was simple. I was going to quickly shower, pack a small duffel bag, and tell David I was going to a girls' weekend at a vineyard in Napa. In reality, I had a luxury boutique hotel booked 2 towns over with Greg. I even practiced the lie in the rearview mirror on my way home, making sure my smile looked natural. But when I walked into the living room, the house was dead silent. There was no TV playing, no sound of dinner cooking. David was sitting perfectly still in his leather armchair. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't reading a book. He was just staring directly at the front door, waiting for me. And sitting perfectly lined up next to the entryway were 3 large hard-shell suitcases. My suitcases, packed to the brim, with my favorite winter coat draped neatly over the handles. My heart gave a slight nervous flutter, but my arrogance told me I could still bluff my way through. I asked him if we were going somewhere, forcing a light, breezy laugh that echoed awkwardly in the quiet room. David didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He just looked at me with eyes so empty and clinical that they practically froze my blood. He told me he wasn't going anywhere, but I was. The air completely left my lungs. I froze in the middle of the foyer. I tried to play dumb. I tried to form a sentence, tried to ask what he meant or why my bags were out, but my throat completely closed up. David slowly leaned back in his chair and methodically began to dismantle my entire existence. He told me he had known about Greg for 3 months. He didn't yell. He spoke like he was reading a grocery list. He told me he knew about the hidden texts. He knew the name of the boutique hotel I had booked for tonight. He even recited word for word the romantic promises Greg had been texting me. He knew Greg told me he wanted me all to himself. He knew Greg begged me to leave my marriage. So, David said, he decided to give Greg exactly what he asked for. My stomach completely dropped into a bottomless pit. The illusion of my control shattered in an instant. I fell to my knees and begged him to let me explain. I told him it meant nothing, that it was a stupid mistake. But David just checked his watch. He told me there was nothing left to explain and that I didn't even have to worry about the logistics of moving out. He had already packed my clothes, my shoes, and the expensive jewelry he had bought me over the last 5 years. And then he delivered the final blow. He told me that 10 minutes ago he used my iPad to call Greg. The room started spinning so fast I had to put my hands on the floor to steady myself. I looked up at him, my vision blurred with tears, and asked him what he meant. David nodded slowly, completely unbothered by my panic. He said he told Greg I had finally confessed everything. He told Greg my bags were packed, that my marriage was over, and that Greg needed to come pick me up right now so we could finally start our happily ever after together. I started sobbing hysterically, the reality of my life collapsing in real time. I knew Greg. I knew the grand promises he made were just fantasies meant to get me into bed. I knew he didn't actually want the responsibility of a ruined woman with 3 suitcases. Before I could say another word, before I could even try to formulate a plan, the sound of tires screeching echoed from the driveway. Car doors slammed. Heavy, frantic footsteps ran up our front walkway. David stood up, smoothed out his shirt, walked over to the front door, and pulled it wide open. Greg was standing there on my front porch, breathing heavily. But he didn't look like a romantic hero arriving to rescue the love of his life. He looked absolutely terrified. He looked like a cornered animal caught in a trap. He was pale, sweating, and his eyes darted nervously around the entryway. David stepped aside, pointed to me kneeling on the floor next to my 3 suitcases, and politely told Greg that I was all his. He even offered to help Greg carry the bags to his car. I looked up at Greg, mascara running down my face, silently begging him to step inside and defend me. I waited for him to grab my hand, to tell David that we loved each other, to make good on a single promise he had made me for the last 6 months. But Greg took a physical step backward. He looked at me crying on the floor, then looked at David's calm, imposing posture, and his face contorted with panic. He stammered, raising his hands defensively in front of his chest. He told David he couldn't take me. He said he had a long-term girlfriend who lived with him. He said he leased a tiny 1-bedroom apartment and could barely pay his own bills. He looked right at me and screamed that this was just supposed to be fun, and that he never actually wanted me to leave my husband. The words hit me like a physical punch to the face. It was the most profound humiliation I have ever experienced. The man who had promised me the world, the man I had risked my entire marriage, my home, and my future for, was backing away from me like I was a contagious disease. He was exposing himself as a pathetic, cowardly liar, and I had traded a loyal husband for him. David just nodded, as if he had predicted this exact, pathetic outcome from the very beginning. He looked at Greg and calmly stated that I didn't live in this house anymore, so he suggested Greg figure out where I was going to sleep tonight. Greg shook his head frantically. He yelled that he wasn't taking me and that this wasn't his problem. He actually turned his back on me, sprinted to his car, and peeled out of my driveway, leaving me completely abandoned. I collapsed onto my suitcases, sobbing uncontrollably into my hands. The silence of the neighborhood settling back in was deafening. I looked up at my husband, reaching my hand out, begging for any shred of mercy. I told him I had nowhere to go. David looked down at me. There was no anger in his eyes. There wasn't even sadness. Just total, absolute indifference. He looked at a bad investment he had finally liquidated. He said it looked like my lover didn't want me either. Then he stepped back inside, pulled the heavy front door shut, and I heard the deadbolt click into place, locking me out of my own life forever. People think the hardest part of having an affair is the lying. It's not. The hardest part is the absolute arrogance it breeds inside of you. You get so used to getting away with it, so accustomed to the thrill of the secret, that you start to believe you are fundamentally smarter than the person you promised to spend your life with. You look at your spouse sitting on the couch watching television and you think, he has no idea. I control the entire reality of this house. My husband, Liam, was an architect. His entire brain was wired for structure, planning, and anticipating stress points before a building could collapse. He was a man who lived by spreadsheets. If we went on vacation, he had the rental car booked 6 months in advance, the dinner reservations color-coded, and the itinerary printed out in a neat little folder. He was steady, he was predictable, and after 7 years of marriage, I found his absolute reliability completely suffocating. That's exactly how I justified my affair with Ryan. Ryan was a bartender at a high-end downtown lounge where I used to go for drinks with my corporate team after big client pitches. Ryan was chaotic. He lived out of a duffel bag in a tiny apartment he shared with 2 roommates. He didn't have a 5-year plan. He barely had a 5-day plan. He was reckless, spontaneous, and everything my husband wasn't. For 8 months, my affair with Ryan was my private escape hatch. It was my bubble. I would leave my sterile, perfectly organized house, tell Liam I had late meetings, and go sit in a dark, noisy bar. I thought I was a mastermind. I thought I had perfectly compartmentalized my life. I genuinely believed Liam was too busy looking at AutoCAD files and architectural blueprints to notice me tilting my phone screen away from him at the dinner table. Our 7-year anniversary was approaching in October, and honestly, the guilt was starting to become a heavy physical weight on my chest. The fantasy of Ryan was wearing off, and the reality of what I was risking was setting in. I had made a firm, silent promise to myself. I was going to end things with Ryan after the holidays. I was going to recommit to my marriage. But Liam beat me to it. 2 days before our anniversary, I came home from work to a house that smelled like roasted garlic and expensive wine. I walked into the bedroom and stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting perfectly at the foot of our bed was a sleek, black, hard-shell suitcase. Liam was standing by the closet, pouring 2 glasses of Cabernet, a gentle, incredibly warm smile on his face. He walked over, handed me a glass, and kissed me softly on the forehead. "Pack for 2 weeks," he said. I just stared at him. "Liam, what are you talking about? I have work. We have the dog. Taken care of," he interrupted smoothly. "I called your boss on Monday. She cleared your schedule. Buster is already dropped off at the luxury boarding kennel downtown. The house sitter is coming to water the plants. I booked us a surprise anniversary trip." I was completely overwhelmed. My eyes filled with tears. I felt so incredibly loved and simultaneously so deeply, violently guilty. My husband, the man I thought was too predictable to ever surprise me, had orchestrated a flawless romantic getaway. I packed my best clothes, imagining 2 weeks in Italy or Greece, actively hating myself for ever betraying him. While Liam was downstairs cleaning up the kitchen, I locked myself in the master bathroom. I pulled out my phone and quickly texted Ryan. "My husband is surprising me with a 2-week trip. Leaving tomorrow. We have to go completely no contact until I get back. I'll explain everything then." Ryan sent back a sad face emoji and typed, "I'll be waiting for you. Have a safe flight." The morning of the flight, Liam was in a fantastic mood. He was practically glowing. He woke up early, made my favorite pour-over coffee, and loaded my heavy suitcase into the trunk of his SUV. The drive to the airport took 45 minutes, and looking back, the psychological torture of that car ride was an absolute masterpiece. Liam held my hand over the center console the entire time. He played a playlist that included our wedding song. He was so relaxed, so completely at ease. "I really think this trip is going to change everything for us," Liam said, keeping his eyes on the highway. "I think it's going to give us exactly the perspective we've been needing." "I know it will," I replied, squeezing his hand, completely blind to the terrifying double meaning of his words. "I love you, Liam. Thank you for doing this." "You deserve it," he said softly. "You really deserve exactly what's waiting for you." We pulled up to the international drop-off zone at Terminal 4. The sky was overcast, and the curb was bustling with travelers hauling luggage and families hugging goodbye. Liam put the SUV in park and stepped out into the crisp October air. I grabbed my purse, feeling a flutter of excitement in my stomach. I walked around to the back of the car. Liam had popped the trunk and lifted my heavy black suitcase out, setting it gently on the concrete curb. He pulled the telescopic handle up for me. I looked into the trunk. It was empty. "Aren't you getting your bags?" I asked, completely confused. "Liam, where is your suitcase?" "I didn't pack one," he said calmly. He reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. He handed it to me. "I'm not going." I laughed, a nervous, breathy sound. "Liam, what are you talking about? Stop messing around, we're going to miss our flight." "Open the envelope, Chloe," he said. His voice hadn't changed pitch, but the warmth was entirely gone. It was suddenly hollow, clinical. My hands started to tremble. I broke the seal on the envelope and pulled out the thick cardstock itineraries. There were 2 first-class boarding passes. The destination was Paris. I looked at the name on the first ticket. It was mine. Then I looked at the name on the second ticket. It said Ryan Davis. All the air left my lungs in a violent rush. The busy, noisy airport around me seemed to instantly fade into a dull, muffled static. I felt the blood drain from my face, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. I looked up at my husband. I expected him to be screaming. I expected his face to be purple with rage. I expected him to throw my luggage into the street or call me every name in the book. But he wasn't doing any of that. He was leaning casually against the bumper of the car, his hands resting in his pockets, looking at me with an expression of absolute, terrifying nothingness. He was looking at me like I was a stranger he was mildly bored by. "Liam, what is this?" I choked out. The tears instantly spilled over my eyelashes, hot and stinging. "It's your new life," he said, his voice as calm as if he were reading a grocery list. "I've known since June, Chloe. You left your iPad unlocked and your iMessages synced over the Wi-Fi. I read all of them. I've read every single text for 4 months. Oh my God, Liam, please." "Don't interrupt me," he said smoothly. He didn't raise his voice, but the command was absolute. "You've been telling Ryan for 8 months that you wish you could run away with him. You told him that my structured life holds you back. You told him you wanted passion and spontaneity. So I took care of the logistics for you." Please stop," I begged, taking a step toward him. I reached out to grab his arm, but he took a very deliberate, measured step backward, avoiding my touch like I was diseased. "It meant nothing. It was a stupid fantasy. I love you, Liam. I was going to end it." "I don't care what you were going to do," Liam said, a tiny, chilling smile touching the corner of his mouth. "The house is being listed with a realtor on Monday. I've already moved the rest of your clothes and your personal items into a climate-controlled storage unit. The keys and the unit number are in that envelope. I've drained our joint checking account of exactly my half, and I've changed the direct deposit for my salary. My lawyer will email yours on Monday morning." "You can't do this." I was openly sobbing now, my chest heaving. People on the sidewalk were turning to stare at the crying woman in the designer coat. "You can't just abandon me here." "I'm not abandoning you," Liam said reasonably. "Ryan is waiting for you at the gate. I went to his bar on Tuesday afternoon. I sat at his counter, I bought him a drink, and then I bought him a one-way ticket to France. I told him that if he really loved you, if he was the spontaneous romantic you thought he was, he'd take you to Paris today." He was very excited to win. Liam opened his car door and slid into the driver's seat. He rolled down the window and looked at me one last time. The architect had found the flaw in the foundation, and he had simply demolished the building. "Have a great life in Paris, Chloe," he said. He rolled the window up. He put the car in drive, checked his blind spot, and merged seamlessly into the heavy airport traffic. He didn't even look in the rearview mirror. I stood alone on the concrete curb for 20 minutes. My legs were shaking so violently I had to sit on my suitcase. The envelope in my hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Liam hadn't just caught me. He had orchestrated my perfect nightmare. By throwing me directly into my fantasy, he forced me to realize it wasn't a fantasy at all. It was a downgrade. I wiped my face, took a shaky breath, and dragged my suitcase through the automatic sliding doors. I went through TSA in a total daze. I walked down the long, brightly lit terminal toward Gate 42. As I approached the seating area, I saw him, Ryan. He was wearing an oversized hoodie, holding a cheap neck pillow and a plastic duty-free bag. When he saw me, his face lit up with this goofy, arrogant grin. He actually thought he had won. He walked over, tried to kiss me, and started rambling about how crazy it was that my husband just handed me over, and how wild Paris was going to be. I looked at Ryan, really looked at him, and I felt entirely sick to my stomach. Without the thrill of sneaking around, without the backdrop of my safe, comfortable marriage to contrast him against, Ryan was just a disorganized, immature bartender. And I was about to board a 9-hour flight sitting next to him, with nowhere to live, no husband, and absolutely nothing left of the life I had so arrogantly thrown away. I didn't realize my marriage was already over until he asked me that question. Not when he found out about the affair. Not when he confronted me. Not even when he told me he knew everything. It was one simple question, and I couldn't answer it. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 8 years. From the outside, we looked like we had everything together. Stable jobs, nice house, no major problems. But inside the marriage, things had slowly started to fade. We didn't fight. We didn't argue. We just stopped connecting. Our conversations became shorter. Our routines became automatic. We were more like roommates than anything else. And at some point, I started telling myself that something was missing. That I deserved more. That I needed to feel something again. That's when I met Ryan. Ryan worked at a partner company we collaborated with occasionally. He was everything Daniel wasn't. Outgoing, confident, intense. The kind of person who made you feel important just by paying attention to you. The first time we had a real conversation, he looked at me and said, "You don't seem happy." I laughed it off. But the truth is, it stuck with me. Because part of me knew he was right. We started talking more. At first it was harmless. Work conversations, then jokes, then personal topics, then daily messages. And before I even realized what was happening, I was looking forward to talking to him more than I looked forward to going home. That should have been my warning. But I ignored it. Because it felt good. Really good. The affair didn't start all at once. It built slowly. Flirting turned into late-night texting. Late-night texting turned into meeting up after work. And one night, after a few drinks, it crossed the line. I remember sitting in my car afterward, staring at the steering wheel, knowing I had just changed everything. And instead of ending it, I kept going. For 5 months, I lived a double life. At home, I was Daniel's wife. At work, I was Ryan's secret. I lied constantly. Working late, meeting friends, fake events. Every excuse came easier than the last. And Daniel never questioned me. He trusted me completely. That trust made it easier to keep going. At least, that's what I thought. The night everything fell apart started quietly. Daniel and I were sitting in the living room. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching it. He muted it suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" he said. My stomach tightened instantly. "Yeah." He looked at me for a moment, long enough that I knew something was wrong. "Are you seeing someone?" My heart dropped. There it was. The moment I had been avoiding for months. And somehow I still wasn't ready. "I don't know what you mean," I said quickly. But he didn't react. He just kept looking at me. Calm, quiet, waiting. "I saw the messages," he said. The room felt like it was closing in around me. "How long?" he asked. I hesitated, because saying it out loud would make it real. 5 months, I admitted. Daniel nodded slowly, like he already knew. There was no anger, no yelling, just silence. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. At least in that moment. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Then he asked me the question that changed everything. Do you love him? The words hit me harder than anything else. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Because I didn't know. Or maybe I did know, and I didn't want to say it. Daniel watched me struggle, and I could see it in his eyes, the moment he understood. You don't, he said quietly. I swallowed. I don't know. He nodded. Okay. That hurt more than if he had yelled. What does that mean? I asked. It means, he said calmly, that you didn't do this for love. My chest tightened. You did it because you were bored. The truth in his voice made it impossible to argue. And that's worse, he added. Tears started to form in my eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen. But you didn't stop it either, he said. I didn't have a response for that, because he was right. Then he asked me the question I couldn't answer. If you had to choose right now, me or him, who would you pick? My heart started pounding, because suddenly everything became real. No more hiding, no more pretending, just a choice. And I couldn't make it. I sat there in silence, trying to force an answer out. But nothing came. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. And the longer I stayed silent, the worse it became. Daniel exhaled slowly. I think that tells me everything I need to know. My chest tightened. Daniel, wait. But he shook his head. No. His voice wasn't angry. It was calm, final. You should have known. The weight of those words crushed me. I just needed time, I said. He looked at me. You had 5 months. That hit harder than anything else. I would have chosen you, I said quickly. But even as I said it, I knew it didn't sound convincing. Daniel noticed too. That's the problem, he said quietly. You're not sure. He stood up. I've already spoken to a lawyer. My world stopped. What? I found out 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. He had known for 3 weeks. And you didn't say anything? He shook his head. I was waiting to see if you'd choose me. The guilt hit me all at once. I am choosing you, I said desperately. But it was too late. He looked at me one last time. No, you didn't. That was the moment I realized something I wish I had understood sooner. It wasn't the cheating that ended my marriage. It was the hesitation. Because when it mattered most, I couldn't choose him. And he knew it.